The lazy summer morning at the Oakville Police Department was shattered by the urgent banging of the station's glass doors. Officer Ryan Peterson, a seasoned cop known for his unflappable demeanor, looked up from his desk, his coffee mug suspended halfway to his lips. The sight that greeted him was enough to make even the most hardened officer do a double take. There, standing in the doorway, was a golden retriever. But this wasn't your average family pet out for a stroll. The dog's fur was matted with mud and leaves, evidence of a grueling journey through rough terrain. Her sides heaved with exhaustion, and her eyes. Ryan had never seen such a mix of desperation and determination in an animal's gaze before. But it wasn't just the dog's appearance that caught everyone's attention. Clamped gently in her mouth was a tiny, wet puppy, its eyes barely open. At her muddy paws, 2 more puppies scrambled and whined softly, clearly distressed but alive. For a moment, the entire station fell silent. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, everyone sprang into action. Ryan was the first to move, his instincts as both a cop and an animal lover kicking in. He approached the dog slowly, his voice low and soothing. "Hey there, girl. It's okay. You're safe now." The golden retriever's eyes locked onto Ryan's, and he felt a jolt of connection. There was an intelligence there, a pleading that went beyond simple animal instinct. She was asking for help, not just for herself, but for her babies. As Ryan knelt beside her, the mother dog finally allowed herself to collapse onto the cool tile floor. Her body trembled with fatigue, but she kept her puppies close, sheltering them as best she could. Officer Grace Alvarez, Ryan's partner of 5 years, was already on the phone with the local vet. "Dr. Martinez?" "Yeah, it's Grace from the station. We've got an emergency here. A golden retriever just showed up with 3 puppies. They look rough." While Grace handled the call, Ryan and a few other officers gently examined the dogs. The puppies were small and weak, but miraculously unharmed. The mother, however, was in rough shape. Her paws were raw and bleeding, and Ryan could feel her ribs through her dirty coat. "What in the world happened to you?" Ryan murmured, running his hand gently along the dog's side. She whined softly in response, her tail giving a weak thump against the floor. Officer Tom Reeves, the station's resident tech whiz, was already pulling up local missing dog reports on his computer. "No matches for a golden retriever with puppies," he called out. "At least not in the last month." Ryan nodded absently, his focus still on the exhausted mother. There was something about her behavior that nagged at him. Every time someone walked near the station doors, her ears would prick up, and her gaze would dart to the entrance. It wasn't the behavior of a lost pet happy to be found. This dog was scared of something. "She didn't just wander in here by accident," Ryan said, voicing his thoughts aloud. "She came here on purpose. She was looking for help." Grace, off the phone now, knelt beside her partner. "The vet's on his way. Should be here in about 15 minutes. She reached out to stroke the mother dog's head, and the retriever leaned into her touch, seemingly grateful for the kindness. As they waited for the vet, the officers worked to make their unexpected guests more comfortable. Someone found an old blanket in the lost and found, which they used to create a makeshift bed. Another officer brought a bowl of water, which the mother lapped at gratefully. The puppies, now that the immediate danger had passed, began to show signs of life. They squirmed and yipped, their tiny paws batting at the air. Despite her exhaustion, the mother dog kept a watchful eye on her babies, gently nudging them back when they strayed too far. "She's a good mom," Grace observed, a note of admiration in her voice. "Must have been hell, trying to keep all 3 of them safe on whatever journey they had." Ryan nodded, his mind racing. In his 15 years on the force, he'd seen all sorts of strange things, but this was something different. This wasn't just a case of a lost dog. There was a story here, and he had a feeling it wasn't a happy one. The vet arrived in a flurry of activity, his medical bag in hand. Dr. Martinez was a kind-faced man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and glasses that always seemed to be sliding down his nose. He'd been the town's go-to veterinarian for as long as anyone could remember. "All right, let's see what we've got here," he said, kneeling beside the dogs. The mother watched him warily but didn't growl or snap as he began his examination. It was as if she knew he was there to help. As Dr. Martinez worked, Checking vitals and cleaning wounds, Ryan filled him in on how the dogs had arrived. The vet's face grew increasingly concerned as he listened. "Well, I can tell you one thing," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "These pups are barely 2 weeks old. For her to have traveled any distance with them, it's remarkable. She must have been desperate." The word hung in the air, adding weight to the uneasy feeling that had been growing in Ryan's gut. Desperate. But desperate for what? To escape what? As if in answer to his unspoken question, Officer Reeves called out from his desk. "Guys, you might want to see this." Ryan and Grace made their way over to Tom's computer. On the screen was a grainy image from one of the traffic cameras on Main Street. It showed the golden retriever, Puppies in tow, making her way down the sidewalk towards the police station. The timestamp on the image was from just over an hour ago. "I backtracked her path as far as I could," Tom explained. "She came from the north, from the direction of Old Miller's farm. But here's the weird thing." He pulled up another image, this one from a camera near the edge of town. In it, they could just make out the shape of a black truck speeding away, heading in the opposite direction from the dog. "Could be nothing," Tom said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe that. Ryan stared at the image, a chill running down his spine. "Or it could be everything," he murmured. Back across the room, the mother dog had finally succumbed to her exhaustion. She lay curled around her puppies, her eyes closed but her ears still twitching at every sound. Looking at her, Ryan felt a surge of protectiveness. Whatever this dog had been through, whatever she was running from, she had come here for a reason. She had chosen them for help. "We'll figure this out," he promised softly, more to himself than to the sleeping dog. "Whatever's going on, we'll get to the bottom of it." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the station floor, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. A mother's desperate journey, a mysterious truck, a deliberate seek for help. All the pieces were there, waiting to be put together. And Ryan Peterson, with his partner Grace by his side, was determined to solve this puzzle. Little did he know, the arrival of this golden retriever and her puppies was about to uncover a dark secret lurking in their quiet town, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about their community and test the limits of compassion, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her children. As the morning wore on, the Oakville Police Department buzzed with an energy that was unusual for the small-town station. The unexpected arrival of the golden retriever and her puppies had thrown everyone's routine into disarray, but there was an underlying current of determination. These animals needed help, and by God, they were going to get it. Dr. Martinez had finished his initial examination and was now on the phone with the local animal shelter, arranging for supplies. The puppies, cleaned up and fed with a bottle, were nestled in a cardboard box lined with soft towels. They slept peacefully, unaware of the commotion around them. The mother dog, however, remained alert despite her exhaustion. Ryan had managed to coax her into eating some kibble that one of the officers had run out to buy, but she refused to settle down completely. Her eyes constantly darted to the windows and doors, her body tense as if ready to spring into action at any moment. Grace Alvarez watched the dog's behavior with growing concern. She'd always had a knack for reading people, and apparently, that skill extended to animals as well. "Ryan," she said, pulling her partner aside, "something's not right here." Ryan nodded, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I know. She's not just tired or lost. She's scared." "Not just scared," Grace corrected. "She's terrified of something out there." She gestured towards the large windows that faced the street. "Every time someone walks by, she flinches. It's like she's expecting." "Expecting what?" Ryan prompted when Grace trailed off. Grace shook her head, frustration evident in her furrowed brow. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it can't be good." As if on cue, Officer Tom Reeves burst through the door that led to the parking lot. His face was pale, and he was slightly out of breath. "Guys, you need to see this." Ryan and Grace exchanged a glance before following Tom outside. The summer heat hit them like a wall as they stepped into the parking lot, the asphalt shimming in the late morning sun. Tom led them to the far end of the lot, where a black pickup truck was parked in the shadows of an old oak tree. "I came out for a smoke," Tom explained, his voice low. "And I noticed this." It wasn't here earlier this morning. As they approached the truck, Ryan felt a chill despite the heat. The vehicle was covered in a fine layer of dust, as if it had been driven down a lot of dirt roads. There were no license plates, front or back. "That's not all," Tom said, gesturing to the truck bed. "Look." Ryan peered over the side, and his stomach turned. In the bed of the truck was a heavy chain, its links caked with rust and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. Next to it lay a muzzle, the kind used on large dogs. Grace let out a soft curse. "You think this is connected to our golden retriever?" Ryan nodded grimly. "It's too much of a coincidence not to be." He turned to Tom. "Any signs of the driver?" Tom shook his head. "Nothing. It's like they just abandoned it here." Ryan's mind was racing. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was ugly. "All right," he said, slipping into cop mode. "Tom, I want you to run the VIN number. See if you can trace the owner. Grace, let's get forensics down here. I want this truck gone over with a fine-tooth comb." As Tom hurried back to the station, Ryan and Grace continued their examination of the truck. Grace pulled on a pair of latex gloves and carefully opened the driver's side door. The interior smelled of cigarette smoke and something else, something rank. "Ryan," Grace called, her voice tight. "Look at this." Ryan came around to her side and peered in. The floor of the truck was covered in dog hair, golden dog hair. And there, stuck between the seats, was a torn piece of fabric. It looked like it had come from a blanket, and it was stained dark with what could only be blood. "Jesus," Ryan breathed. The uneasy feeling in his gut was now a full-blown alarm. Whatever had happened to that golden retriever, it was far worse than they had initially thought. Back inside the station, the atmosphere had changed. The initial excitement of the dog's arrival had given way to a tense anticipation. Officers moved with purpose, making calls, checking databases. The mother dog, sensing the shift, had positioned herself protectively in front of the box containing her puppies. Dr. Martinez approached Ryan as soon as he and Grace re-entered the building. "I've got some more information for you," he said, his face grave. "I did a more thorough examination of the mother while you were out. Ryan, she's been abused. Badly." Ryan felt his fists clench involuntarily. "How bad?" The vet sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. "She's malnourished, for one. And there are old injuries that never healed properly. Broken ribs, a fractured leg that set wrong. But that's not the worst of it." He paused, as if steeling himself. "She's been bred. A lot. Way more than is healthy. I'd bet money that this isn't her first litter, not by a long shot." The implications of the vet's words hung heavy in the air. Ryan thought of the truck outside, the chain, the muzzle. A horrible picture was forming in his mind. Grace voiced what they were all thinking. "Dogfighting," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were using her as a breeder for fighting dogs." Ryan nodded, feeling sick. It explained everything: the dog's fear, her desperate flight to the police station, the suspicious truck. They had stumbled onto something big, something evil. "All right," Ryan said, his voice hard with determination. "Here's what we're going to do. Grace, I want you to contact the state police. Let them know what we've found. We might need their resources on this one. Tom, any luck with that VIN number?" Tom shook his head. "It's been filed off. Professionally, from the looks of it. These guys knew what they were doing." Ryan wasn't surprised. People involved in dogfighting rings were often connected to other criminal activities. They knew how to cover their tracks. "Okay, keep digging. Check for any reports of suspicious activities, especially around Old Miller's farm. That's where our girl seemed to come from." Ryan turned to Dr. Martinez. "Doc, I hate to ask, but can you stick around? If we're dealing with what I think we are, we might need your expertise." The vet nodded solemnly. "Of course. I've already called my assistant to handle the clinic for the day." As the team dispersed to their tasks, Ryan found himself drawn back to the golden retriever. She watched him approach, her eyes wary but not unfriendly. Slowly, he knelt beside her. "You've been through hell, haven't you, girl?" he said softly, reaching out to stroke her head. She leaned into his touch, a soft whine escaping her throat. "But you're safe now. I promise." Looking into those soulful brown eyes, Ryan made a silent vow. He would find the people responsible for this. He would shut down their operation and make sure they paid for what they'd done. It wasn't just about upholding the law anymore. It was about justice, about protecting the innocent. As he sat there, comforting a dog he'd only met hours ago, Ryan Peterson had no idea that this case would become one of the most significant of his career. He didn't know that it would lead him down a dark path, exposing a criminal underworld that had been festering beneath the surface of their quiet town for years. All he knew, in that moment, was that a scared, abused mother had trusted them enough to seek help. And he would be damned if he let her down. The golden retriever sighed, finally allowing herself to relax a little under Ryan's gentle hand. Outside, the summer day continued, bright and seemingly peaceful. But within the walls of the Oakville Police Department, a storm was brewing. The sleepy town was about to wake up to a harsh reality, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. The Oakville Police Department had settled into a focused hum of activity. Officers moved with purpose, following up on leads and making calls. The air conditioning struggled against the summer heat and the warmth of too many bodies in the small station. In the corner, the golden retriever dozed fitfully, one eye always half open, watching over her pups. Ryan Peterson stood at the whiteboard they'd set up, mapping out what they knew so far. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The picture it painted was ugly, a suspected dogfighting ring, operating right under their noses. How long had this been going on? And how had they missed it? Grace Alvarez approached, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. She passed one to Ryan, who accepted it gratefully. "Any word from the state boys?" he asked, taking a sip of the bitter brew. Grace shook her head. "They're sending a liaison, but it'll be a few hours. Apparently, there's a big case wrapping up in Springfield that's got most of their resources tied up." Ryan grunted in acknowledgement. It wasn't ideal, but they'd make do. They always did. The relative calm of the station was shattered as the front doors burst open. Ryan's head snapped up, coffee forgotten. Two men strode in, their very presence seeming to suck the air out of the room. The taller of the two was lean and wiry, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. A long scar ran down his left cheek, puckering slightly at the corner of his mouth. His companion was shorter but broader, built like a bulldog. Both men wore worn jeans and faded flannel shirts, despite the heat. Ryan felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He'd been a cop long enough to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming danger. The tall man's cold eyes scanned the room before settling on Ryan. "Heard you might have found a dog that ain't yours," he drawled, his voice carrying a hint of a southern twang. In the corner, the golden retriever was suddenly wide awake. A low, guttural growl emanated from her throat, a sound that sent chills down Ryan's spine. He'd never heard a dog make a noise quite like that before. The shorter man sneered, taking a step towards the dog. Ryan moved swiftly, positioning himself between the men and the mother dog. "This is a police station," he said firmly, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "If this dog belongs to you, you'll need to provide proof of ownership." The men exchanged a glance, a silent communication passing between them. The tall one spoke again, his voice dangerously low. "Look, officer, she's ours. You've got no right to keep her." Grace had moved to flank Ryan, her posture tense but ready. "Actually, sir," she said, her tone professional but with an edge of steel, "we have every right. This dog came to us in distress, showing signs of abuse and neglect. Until we can verify her ownership and ensure her safety, she's under police protection." The shorter man's face twisted in anger. "You can't do that," he snarled, taking another step forward. Ryan stood his ground. "We can, and we are. Now, if you'd like to file a formal claim, we can take your information. But first, we'll need to talk about the truck in our parking lot. The one with the muzzle and chain in the back." The mention of the evidence made the men bristle visibly. The atmosphere in the station, already tense, became electric. Ryan could almost taste the potential for violence in the air. "You don't understand what you're messing with," the shorter man growled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Behind them, the golden retriever barked fiercely, her body low to the ground and positioned protectively in front of her puppies. The sound seemed to snap something in the shorter man. With a roar of rage, he lunged forward, reaching for Ryan. What happened next was a blur of motion. Ryan sidestepped the attack, years of training kicking in. Grace moved in, her hand on her taser. Other officers rushed forward, responding to the threat. The tall man, seeing his companion subdued, made a break for the door. But Tom Reeves, showing surprising speed for a man who spent most of his time behind a computer, tackled him before he could escape. In moments, both men were face down on the floor, hands cuffed behind their backs. The station erupted into a cacophony of shouts and radio chatter as backup was called and the situation secured. Ryan stood over the subdued men, his heart pounding. This was more than just a case of animal abuse now. These men had assaulted an officer in a police station. Whatever they were involved in, it was big enough that they were willing to risk everything to get that dog back. As the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, Ryan became aware of a warm presence at his side. The golden retriever had left her corner and was now standing next to him, her body pressed against his leg. She was still growling softly, her eyes fixed on the men on the floor. Ryan reached down, placing a reassuring hand on her head. "It's okay, girl," he murmured. "They can't hurt you anymore." Grace approached, her face flushed with exertion but her eyes sharp. "Ryan, we need to move fast. If these guys were willing to come here, there might be others. We need to secure the scene at Old Miller's farm before anyone can destroy evidence." Ryan nodded, his mind already racing ahead. "You're right. Get a team together. I want every available officer on this. And call animal control. If there are more dogs out there, we'll need help." As Grace moved away to make the arrangements, Ryan knelt down next to the tall man, who was glaring up at him with undisguised hatred. "You've just made yourself some enemies," the man hissed. Ryan met his gaze steadily. "No," he replied, his voice hard. "You did that all on your own when you decided to abuse animals for profit. And trust me, by the time we're done, you're going to wish you'd never set foot in this town." Standing up, Ryan surveyed the bustling station. Officers were securing the prisoners, taking statements, preparing for the raid on the farm. In the midst of it all, the golden retriever had returned to her puppies, curling around them protectively. Looking at her, Ryan felt a surge of determination. This case had just blown wide open, and he knew they were in for a long, difficult fight. But seeing the trust in that dog's eyes, the way she had come to him for protection, he knew it was worth it. As he moved to join Grace and plan their next move, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They had stumbled onto something dark, something that had been lurking beneath the surface of their quiet town for far too long. But now it was exposed, brought into the light by the bravery of a mother dog desperate to save her pups. And Ryan Peterson, along with every officer in the Oakville Police Department, was determined to see this through to the end, no matter what it took. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time. Outside, the summer day continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the station. But for Ryan and his team, the world had shifted. A line had been drawn, a stand taken. And there was no going back. The Oakville Police Department had transformed from a sleepy small-town station into a hive of frenzied activity. Officers rushed back and forth, radios crackled with urgent communications, and the air thrummed with tension. At the center of it all stood Ryan Peterson, his face set in grim determination as he coordinated the response to what had quickly become the biggest case of his career. "Grace, I want you to lead the team to Old Miller's farm," Ryan instructed his partner, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Take Johnson and Martinez with you. Remember, we don't know what we're walking into, so approach with caution." Grace nodded, her eyes glinting with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "What about you, Ryan?" "I'm staying here," he replied, glancing towards the holding cells where their two unwelcome visitors were currently stewing. "Someone needs to keep an eye on our guests, and I want to be here when the state police liaison arrives." As Grace gathered her team and headed out, Ryan turned his attention to the golden retriever and her puppies. The mother dog had calmed somewhat since the altercation, but her eyes remained alert, watching every movement in the station with wary attention. Dr. Martinez approached, wiping his hands on a towel. "I've given her a mild sedative," he informed Ryan. "Nothing that will knock her out, just enough to take the edge off her anxiety. Those puppies need to nurse, and she was too keyed up to let them." Ryan nodded his thanks, his gaze softening as he watched the puppies, now contentedly feeding. It was a small moment of peace in the midst of the storm, and he clung to it, using it to center himself for what he knew would be a long and difficult day. The relative calm was shattered by the sudden blaring of sirens outside. Ryan's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Through the station's windows, he could see several vehicles pulling into the parking lot, not police cruisers, but a motley assortment of pickup trucks and battered cars. "What the hell?" Officer Tom Reeves muttered, moving to stand beside Ryan at the window. As they watched, men began to pour out of the vehicles. Ryan counted at least a dozen, all of them looking rough and ready for a fight. His stomach clenched as he recognized a few faces from old mugshots, local troublemakers, petty criminals, and a couple of suspected drug dealers. "Looks like our boys called in some backup," Ryan said grimly. He turned to Tom. "Call Grace. Tell her to get back here now. Then get on the horn to the state police. Tell them we need that backup yesterday." Tom nodded and rushed to comply. Ryan took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. He'd hoped to avoid a confrontation, to handle this through proper channels. But it seemed the other side had different ideas. "Listen up, everyone," Ryan called out, his voice cutting through the tension in the station. "We've got hostiles outside. I want this building locked down tight. Nobody gets in, understand?" The officers moved swiftly to secure the doors and windows. Ryan could see the fear in some of their eyes, especially the younger ones. Oakville wasn't the kind of place where this sort of thing happened. They'd signed up to handle drunk drivers and domestic disputes, not face down an angry mob. But there was determination there too, a steely resolve that made Ryan proud. These were good people, dedicated officers. They might be scared, but they weren't backing down. Outside, the crowd was growing restless. Ryan could hear shouts and the sound of fists pounding on the station's walls. A rock sailed through the air, smashing against a window but failing to break the reinforced glass. "They're trying to intimidate us," Ryan muttered to himself. He turned to the officer nearest him, a rookie named Sarah who had only been on the force for 6 months. "Wheeler, I want you to take Dr. Martinez and the dogs to the back room. Keep them safe, no matter what happens." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. As she ushered the vet and the dogs out of the main area, Ryan steeled himself. It was time to face the music. Taking a deep breath, he strode to the station's main entrance. Through the glass doors, he could see the crowd, their faces twisted with anger and fear. At the forefront stood a man Ryan recognized, Bill Hawkins, a local mechanic who'd always seemed decent enough. Now, though, his eyes blazed with a fanatic light that sent chills down Ryan's spine. Ryan pushed open the door just enough to make himself heard. "This is a police station," he called out, his voice firm and carrying. "You're all trespassing on government property. I'm going to have to ask you to disperse." Bill stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "We ain't going nowhere, Peterson. Not until you give us back what's ours." "And what exactly would that be, Bill?" Ryan asked, fighting to keep his voice level. "You know damn well what," Bill spat. "Them dogs. They ain't yours to keep." Ryan felt a surge of anger, but he pushed it down. Losing his cool now wouldn't help anyone. "Those animals are evidence in an ongoing investigation," he said. "If you have a claim to them, you can file the proper paperwork. But right now, you're all breaking the law. Go home before this gets any worse." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ryan could see some of them wavering, the reality of their situation starting to sink in. But others looked even more determined, their hands clenching into fists at their sides. Bill took another step forward, now just inches from Ryan. "You don't understand, Peterson. This ain't just about some dogs. This is our livelihood you're messing with. Our way of life." Ryan met Bill's gaze steadily. "If your way of life involves abusing animals, Bill, then maybe it needs to be messed with." For a moment, Ryan thought Bill might take a swing at him. But then, from the back of the crowd, a new voice rang out. "Police! Everyone freeze!" Ryan's heart leapt as he saw Grace and her team pushing through the crowd, weapons drawn. At the same time, the wail of sirens filled the air as state police cruisers came screaming into the parking lot. The mood of the crowd shifted instantly. What had moments ago been an angry mob suddenly became a group of very nervous individuals, each realizing the gravity of their situation. "Last chance," Ryan called out. "Anyone who leaves now, we forget this ever happened. Stay, and you're all going to jail." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly at first but then with increasing speed, people began to drift away. Bill Hawkins stood his ground for a moment longer, glaring at Ryan with undisguised hatred. But even he eventually turned and stalked off, leaving the parking lot empty save for the police. As the adrenaline of the moment began to fade, Ryan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. But there was no time to rest. They had a case to solve, animals to save, and a town to protect. Grace approached, holstering her weapon. "Helluva Day, her partner," she said, a wry smile on her face. Ryan couldn't help but chuckle. "You can say that again. But it's not over yet. Not by a long shot." As they turned to head back into the station, Ryan's thoughts turned to the golden retriever and her puppies. In just a few short hours, that brave mother dog had upended their quiet town, exposing a darkness that had been lurking just beneath the surface. But she had also inspired something, a determination to fight for what was right, to protect the vulnerable, to stand up against cruelty and injustice. And as Ryan Peterson walked back into the station, ready to face whatever came next, he knew that he, and every officer with him, would see this through to the end. The standoff was over, but the real battle was just beginning. And in Oakville, a town that had always prided itself on its peace and quiet, nothing would ever be quite the same again. The days following the standoff at the Oakville Police Department were a whirlwind of activity. The quiet town found itself thrust into the spotlight as news of the dogfighting ring spread. Reporters from neighboring cities descended upon Oakville, their vans with satellite dishes becoming a common sight on Main Street. At the center of it all was Ryan Peterson, working tirelessly to piece together the full extent of the operation they'd stumbled upon. The raid on Old Miller's farm had yielded a treasure trove of evidence, each new discovery more horrifying than the last. "It's worse than we thought," Grace said, her voice low as she briefed Ryan in his office. The blinds were drawn, offering a small respite from the chaos outside. "We found records going back at least 5 years. This wasn't just some backyard operation, Ryan. It was organized, professional." Ryan nodded grimly, rubbing his tired eyes. He'd barely slept in the past 72 hours, running on nothing but coffee and determination. "Any leads on who was running the show?" Grace hesitated, then pulled out a folder from her bag. "That's where it gets complicated. Take a look at this." Ryan flipped open the folder and felt his stomach drop. Staring back at him were faces he recognized, prominent businessmen, a city council member, even the pastor from the local megachurch. All implicated in the dogfighting ring. "Jesus," Ryan muttered. "This is going to tear the town apart." But even as they grappled with the far-reaching implications of their discovery, there was a ray of hope that kept them going. The golden retriever, now officially named Hope by the department, was recovering well under Dr. Martinez's care. The vet had set up a makeshift recovery area in a quiet corner of the station, away from the hubbub of the investigation. Ryan found himself drawn there in moments of doubt, watching Hope nurse her puppies or simply sitting with her, finding comfort in her quiet strength. "You know," Dr. Martinez said one evening, as they watched Hope play gently with her growing pups, "I've been a vet for over 30 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" The vet gestured towards Hope. "Most dogs who've been through what she has, they're broken. Afraid of humans, aggressive, unable to trust. But her. It's like she knows she's safe now. Like she understands we're here to help." Ryan nodded, reaching out to scratch Hope behind the ears. She leaned into his touch, her tail wagging softly. "She's something special, that's for sure." As the investigation progressed, Hope's story began to captivate the community. Local children sent in hand-drawn pictures of the brave mother dog. A fundraiser organized by the town's animal shelter raised thousands of dollars for Hope's care and for the other rescued dogs. But it wasn't all positive. As more details of the dog-fighting ring came to light, tensions in the town rose. Those implicated in the scandal faced public outrage, their businesses boycotted, their names become synonymous with cruelty. Ryan found himself walking a tightrope, balancing the need for justice with the desire to keep the peace in a town that was threatening to tear itself apart. "We need to focus on the facts," he reminded his team during a particularly heated briefing. "Our job is to gather evidence and uphold the law. Let the courts handle the rest." But even as he said it, Ryan knew it wasn't that simple. This case had become personal for all of them. Every new piece of evidence, every rescued dog, every sordid detail of the fighting ring only fueled their determination to see justice done. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after Hope's arrival at the station. Tom Reeves burst into Ryan's office, his face flushed with excitement. "I've got it," he said, brandishing a USB drive. "I finally cracked the encrypted files from the farm. Ryan, this is big." And it was. The files contained detailed records of fights, bets, and payoffs. But more importantly, they provided a clear picture of the ring's leadership, a shadowy figure known only as the Marshal. "He's the one calling the shots," Tom explained as they pored over the files. "Arranging the fights, handling the big money, keeping everyone in line." Ryan felt a surge of anticipation. This was the piece they'd been missing, the key to bringing down the entire operation. "Any idea who he is?" Tom shook his head. "Not yet. But I'm working on it. Give me a couple more days, and I think I can track him down." As Tom hurried back to his computer, Ryan found himself once again drawn to Hope's corner. She looked up as he approached, her tail thumping against the floor in greeting. "We're getting close, girl," he murmured, kneeling down beside her. "We're going to make sure no one ever hurts you, or any other dog, like that again." Hope whined softly, resting her head on Ryan's knee. In that moment, looking into her trusting eyes, Ryan felt the weight of his promise. This wasn't just about solving a case anymore. It was about honoring the trust this brave dog had placed in them, about living up to the hope she represented. The next few days were a blur of activity. Tom worked around the clock, following digital breadcrumbs and piecing together the identity of the Marshal. The state police, now fully involved in the case, provided additional resources and manpower. And through it all, Hope's story continued to spread. A local artist painted a mural of her on the side of the animal shelter. A children's book author reached out, wanting to tell Hope's tale of bravery and resilience. It was Hope's story that finally broke the case wide open. A woman from 2 towns oversaw a news report about the brave mother dog and recognized her. She'd seen a golden retriever matching Hope's description at a property owned by a man named Frank Delano. Frank Delano, Grace mused as they added the name to their investigation board. Why does that sound familiar? It was Sarah Wheeler, the rookie officer, who made the connection. Wait, isn't he that big-shot real estate developer? The one who's always going on about traditional values and stuff? A quick background check confirmed it. Frank Delano, prominent businessman and outspoken conservative voice in the county, had a hidden past. A few discreet inquiries turned up whispers of a nickname, the Marshal. As the pieces fell into place, Ryan felt a mix of triumph and dread. They had their man, the mastermind behind years of cruelty and corruption. But bringing him down wouldn't be easy. Delano had money, connections, and a reputation as a pillar of the community. "We've got one shot at this," Ryan told his team as they prepared for the arrest. "Everything has to be by the book. No mistakes, no loopholes for his lawyers to exploit." The dawn raid on Delano's sprawling estate was a tense affair. As they approached the main house, Ryan couldn't help but think of Hope, of her bravery in escaping this world of violence and fear. When the dust settled, Frank Delano, the Marshal, was in custody. The evidence found in his home was damning: records of fights, blood-stained training equipment, even a hidden room filled with trophies from particularly brutal matches. As Delano was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief, Ryan felt a sense of closure. But he knew the real work was just beginning. There would be trials, both in the court of law and in the court of public opinion. The town of Oakville had a long road ahead as it grappled with the darkness that had been lurking in its midst. But there was hope too. In the days that followed, Ryan saw it in the faces of his fellow officers, proud of the work they'd done. He saw it in the community, coming together to support the rescued dogs and each other. And most of all, he saw it in hope. As the golden retriever played with her now thriving puppies in the sunshine outside the station, Ryan knew that her journey, and theirs, was far from over. But they had taken the first steps towards justice, towards healing. Hope's story had unfolded, touching hearts and changing lives. And in Oakville, a town forever changed by the bravery of one mother dog, a new chapter was just beginning. The leaves were turning golden and red, a crisp autumn breeze rustling through the trees as Ryan Peterson stood on the porch of his small farmhouse on the outskirts of Oakville. In his hand was a steaming mug of coffee, its warmth a stark contrast to the cool morning air. But it wasn't the changing seasons that occupied Ryan's thoughts. His gaze was fixed on the golden retriever romping in the yard, her puppies tumbling after her in a joyful chorus of yips and barks. 3 months had passed since the arrest of Frank Delano and the subsequent dismantling of the dogfighting ring. The town of Oakville was slowly healing, the shock of the revelations giving way to a renewed sense of community and purpose. But for Ryan, the most profound change had come in the form of 4 paws and a wagging tail. After weeks of recovery at the police station, it had become clear that Hope, as she was now officially known, needed a permanent home. And somehow, without quite realizing how it had happened, Ryan had found himself volunteering. "It's just temporary," he'd told Grace, even as he was filling out the adoption papers. "Just until we can find her a good family." But watching Hope now, her golden coat gleaming in the morning sun, Ryan knew there was no going back. She wasn't just a temporary guest anymore. She was family. A sharp bark drew Ryan's attention back to the present. Hope was looking at him expectantly, a well-worn tennis ball at her feet. Ryan couldn't help but chuckle. "All right, girl. One more throw, then I've got to get ready for work." As he tossed the ball across the yard, Ryan marveled at the change in Hope. Gone was the terrified, exhausted dog that had stumbled into the police station all those months ago. In her place was a vibrant, playful creature, her eyes bright with joy and trust. The scars of her past would always be there, visible in the way she sometimes startled at loud noises or shied away from strangers. But with each passing day, those moments became fewer and farther between. The puppies, too, had thrived. Under Hope's watchful eye and with the care of Ryan and the local vet, they had grown into healthy, rambunctious young dogs. 2 had already been adopted by families in town, carefully vetted by Ryan himself. The remaining pup, a spunky little female with a white patch on her chest, seemed in no hurry to leave. Ryan had taken to calling her Scout, and he had a sneaking suspicion she might become a permanent resident as well. As Ryan got ready for work, his mind wandered to the changes in Oakville. The aftermath of the dogfighting bust had been difficult. The town had been forced to confront some ugly truths about itself, about the darkness that had been allowed to fester beneath its peaceful surface. There had been anger, denial, and no small amount of shame. But there had been growth too. The animal shelter, once a small, underfunded operation, had become a point of pride for the community. Donations had poured in, allowing for renovations and expanded services. A new program pairing at-risk youth with rescue dogs had shown promising results, giving both kids and animals a second chance. Even the police department had changed. Ryan's handling of the case had earned him a promotion to chief, a position he had accepted with a mix of pride and trepidation. But he was determined to use his new role to foster a culture of compassion and community engagement within the force. As Ryan pulled into the station parking lot, he was greeted by a familiar sight. Grace was waiting for him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Morning, Chief," she said with a grin, handing him one of the cups. "Ready for another exciting day in Oakville?" Ryan rolled his eyes at the title but accepted the coffee gratefully. "As ready as I'll ever be. What's on the agenda for today?" Grace fell into step beside him as they entered the station. "Well, we've got that community outreach meeting at the high school this afternoon." Oh, and Tom wants to show you the new database system he's been working on for tracking animal welfare cases. Ryan nodded, mentally adjusting his schedule. The community outreach program had been his idea, an attempt to rebuild trust between the police and the citizens of Oakville. It wasn't always easy. There were still those who viewed the department with suspicion after the revelations of corruption, but Ryan was committed to the process. As they walked through the station, Ryan couldn't help but notice the changes. The walls, once bare save for a few outdated wanted posters, now displayed colorful drawings sent in by local children. Many featured a certain golden retriever, her heroic story having captured the imagination of Oakville's youngest residents. In the corner where Hope and her puppies had once huddled, there was now a small but well-equipped area for any animals that might find their way to the station. It wasn't often used, but its presence was a constant reminder of the case that had changed everything. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and paperwork. As chief, Ryan spent more time behind a desk than he would have liked, but he made a point of staying connected to the day-to-day operations of the department. He had just finished reviewing a report on a recent string of minor vandalism cases when there was a knock at his door. "Come in," he called, looking up to see Sarah Wheeler, the rookie officer who had proven herself so capable during the dogfighting case. "Chief," Sarah said, a note of excitement in her voice, "I think we've got something. Remember those tips we've been getting about possible animal neglect out on Willow Road? Well, I did some digging, and I think there might be more to it." Ryan leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What have you found?" As Sarah laid out her findings, Ryan felt a familiar surge of determination. This was why he had become a cop in the first place, to help those who couldn't help themselves, to be a voice for the voiceless. Hope's case had only strengthened that resolve. "Good work, Wheeler," he said when she had finished. "Get Grace and put together a plan for further investigation. But remember, we do this by the book. No cutting corners, no matter how noble our intentions." Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "Understood, Chief. And, thanks for the opportunity." As she left, Ryan found himself smiling. It was officers like Sarah, young and idealistic but grounded in proper procedure, who represented the future of the department. The future he was working to build. The rest of the day passed quickly. The community meeting at the high school went better than expected, with several students expressing interest in the new youth volunteer program at the animal shelter. Ryan made a mental note to follow up with the shelter director about expanding the initiative. It was well past sunset by the time Ryan finally headed home. As he pulled into his driveway, he saw a familiar golden shape waiting for him on the porch. Hope's tail started wagging as soon as she saw his car, and Ryan felt the tensions of the day melt away. "Hey, girl," he said softly as he climbed out of the car. "Miss me?" Hope responded with an enthusiastic bark, pressing against his legs as he made his way to the porch. Scout, not to be outdone, came bounding around the corner of the house, yipping excitedly. As Ryan knelt to greet them, he was struck by a sudden wave of emotion. This, he realized, was what it was all about. Not just the big cases or the dramatic busts, but the small moments of connection. The trust in Hope's eyes, the joy in Scout's wagging tail, these were the things that made all the long hours and difficult decisions worthwhile. Inside the house, Ryan went through his evening routine, Hope and Scout never far from his side. As he settled into his favorite armchair, a dog on either side of him, he found his thoughts drifting to the future. There would be more challenges ahead, he knew. More cases to solve, more wrongs to right. The scars left by the dogfighting ring would take time to heal, both for the animals and for the community. But looking at Hope, at the miraculous journey that had brought her from a life of fear and pain to this moment of peace, Ryan felt a profound sense of hope. Oakville had changed, yes. But it had changed for the better. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, to give voice to the voiceless and protection to the vulnerable, there was hope for a brighter future. As the night deepened and the dogs dozed off beside him, Ryan Peterson, once a simple small-town cop and now the architect of a community's healing, allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. They had come so far, and there was still so much to do. But for now, in this moment, all was right in his world. And as he drifted off to sleep, lulled by the soft snoring of the dogs beside him, Ryan knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, he was ready to face them. For Hope, for Scout, for Oakville, and for all those who needed a voice, he would continue to serve and protect. It was more than a job now. It was a calling. A new beginning, not just for him, but for all of Oakville.